Hey everybody, it's Jack with Future Pastimes, and we're reading Dune, and it is a long and very exciting chapter. A lot of interesting action in this chapter. It starts off with Gurney Halleck, and he is with the smugglers. So they were spotted by Paul and Stilgar at the end of Paul's worm ride, and they have hidden and baited the area with a trap using some spice, which the smugglers have seen. So they're swooping down to set up and get in there and collect the spice before a Harkonnen patrol or a Fremen patrol or a sandworm shows up. And Gurney is directing everything. And then suddenly the Fremen pop out of every nook and cranny, and they have rockets, and they're shooting down the ornithopters and drones and coming up out of the sand and rocks to surround Gurney and the other smugglers, many of whom try to fight back but are overwhelmed. Several are killed. And Gurney sees a Fremen. You can only see the Fremen's blue within blue eyes as he stands in front of him. And as Gurney is about to draw his knife, the Fremen says, "You don't need to draw your knife, Gurney Halleck." And Gurney, he recognizes the voice, and he's like, "How do you know my name?" And they remove their mask, and it's Paul. And at first, Gurney thinks he's maybe seeing the Duke, but he's too young. And then he realizes that Paul is alive. And eventually they embrace, and Gurney is kind of overwhelmed. Paul tells Gurney to have the rest of the smugglers stop struggling, which Gurney eventually does, and they begin to take stock. Paul asks Gurney about his men, and Gurney says they're all smugglers and they're good at their job, but he does some old Atreides battle language hand signals to let them know there's some that he doesn't trust. Some of the new off-worlders who have joined the smugglers. They are not to be trusted, which Paul understands, and Paul lets some of his other Fremen, Korba, who's one of the Fedaykin, know to secure these men until they can be properly questioned. And Gurney learns a number of things. Stilgar comes up, and Stilgar's a little bit cool towards Gurney Halleck, and which Paul notes, and he's not sure what that's all about. And then Chani comes up as well, and Gurney realizes that she and Paul are an item. And when Chani leaves, Paul explains that, yes, she's the mother of his child. And, Gurney is just, he's like, wow, there's a lot that has happened here that I didn't know about. The Fremen realize that there is a storm coming. Well, actually, first a worm shows up, and the Fremen mount the worm and steer it away, and which Gurney sees, and Paul explains that they had to attack these smugglers because they wanted to make sure they didn't see things they weren't supposed to, like that Fremen riding the worm, which they don't normally like to do in broad daylight. And so Gurney's like, "Yeah, we'd heard about this as a possibility, but you can't really believe it until you've seen it." And then there's a storm coming, so they have to take shelter. So they go into, there is a cavern there. It's called Cave of Birds. And Paul and get down there. And as soon as they're walking in, there's some commotion. And Paul runs up, and he sees the Fremen are fighting with some of the smugglers. But he can tell from the way that they are in groups of 3 back to back that they are Sardaukar. And they're losing the fight, and at some point there's only like 3 of them left, and Paul steps forward and he tells them, "Sardaukar, stop fighting." And he goes to question one of them, and he ends up using the voice to get the guy to submit and to answer questions about what his name is, and it's Captain Aramsham. And Paul says, "What gives you the authority to attack the Duke of House Atreides?" And so the Sardaukar were not expecting that. And one of them gets ready to attack Paul, and Captain Aramsham kills him. And he says to Paul, he's like, I've killed a friend. because that shouldn't have happened, even though we have been ordered to come to Arrakis to take out Muad'Dib. And they're just now figuring out that Paul is Muad'Dib, which when Gurney learns it, he's like, well, this explains a lot, because the Fremen have been fighting in a much more organized and sneaky militaristic fashion, conducting raids in a way that Gurney himself would have tried to plan had he been involved. And now he understands why it is, and he realizes that Paul considers himself one of the Fremen. He keeps saying, we are doing this, and this is ours and us, and he's talking in terms of the Fremen. And so Gurney is trying to process all of this, and Paul takes this opportunity to bring in Stilgar, who he noticed that when the Sardaukar attacked, Stilgar's first thought was to whisk Chani away to safety. So they have come back now that they have finally subdued the Sardaukar, and Paul explains to Corbo that he should have told him that they were Sardaukar and that they probably had more weapons and other things hidden on them. And he says you could scope them and scan them and search them and find a bunch of stuff, and still you wouldn't have found everything. So that they're great at that sort of thing. So he's like, do your best. And Corbo's like, we should kill them. And Gurney's like, yeah, they can't be allowed to live. They're going to report back to the Emperor that you're Muad'Dib and that you have bested Sardaukar. So it's a lot. But Paul is like, no, I want them to escape. And then he explains to Chani that she's going to need to go to the southern siege to be safe, because Stilgar's instincts were right. He doesn't want to be distracted worrying about Chani. But he, like I said, he's taking this opportunity to try to start dealing with the other problem, which is him having to call out Stilgar. So he takes the Sardaukar knife and he gives it to Stilgar, and he says, would you kill me with this knife if I call you out? And Stilgar, he's really struggling with it, and Paul basically explains that ways change, and he needs Stilgar, and the tribe needs Stilgar. And if Stilgar is going to attack him, Paul's not going to draw a weapon. He's not going to fight back. But Stilgar's like, I can't kill you. It wouldn't be good for the tribe. And so he agrees, yeah, things are going to need to change. And Paul explains to Chani, he says, when you go to the southern siege, tell my mother what is going on, and tell her that we need to find a way to convince the young men of the tribe that Paul does not need to call out Stilgar. He is focused on being Duke of Arrakis. He can't be bothered with being the head of Siege Tabor. He's got all of the Fremen tribes that he needs to account for. And so Stilgar gets it. He understands that ways change, and that if he were to fight Paul, he wouldn't be able to beat him anyway. And he wouldn't be able to kill him, even if the opportunity presented itself. So the chapter ends with Gurney realizing that Lady Jessica is alive and is with the Fremen as well. And Gurney has thought this whole time, these last couple of years, that Jessica was the traitor. He's been convinced of it, and he is determined to see that she is killed. And he's trying to figure out, how can I convince Paul that this is true before I kill her? Because killing her is my number one priority right now. And so it's a very dynamic chapter, a lot of great stuff going on. I love how it starts off with just a really detailed description of the smuggler operation and how they get all of their machinery in, and how they're trying to scan, and how they're trying to not get too high up because they don't want to be spotted by the Harkonnens either. And then the ambush is sprung, and a pretty emotional reunion between Paul and Gurney. And then Gurney realizing that his place is at Paul's side, and with the ramifications of that, he's going to have to be among the Fremen, and the Fremen are going to have to accept him, because this is going to be Muad'Dib's will as well. So when you think back to earlier, how they were not interested in having Jessica join the tribe because she's too old to learn their ways, and But like Paul said, ways change, and there's a lot of change coming. And Paul explains that the reason that they are not going to travel to the southern seas, which was where they were headed when he completed his worm ride test. It's because it's time to escalate this up. He says the war is not down there; it's up here where the Harkonnens are, where the Emperor will be as well. He asks Gurney about how many guild agents are around Raban, and Gurney says there's guild agents everywhere, and they're buying up spice like it's going out of style. And Paul starts to explain. He's like, it's because we control spice, the Fremen control it, and Gurney's like, the Harkonnens control it, but he's like, no, we can destroy the spice, and that means we control it. And so it's a very impactful moment in a chapter that's filled with them. Just a really exciting chapter. In terms of adaptation, there's a very brief version of this in the Lynch movie. It's at the end of a montage. They find the smugglers and they fight them, and Paul sees Gurney, and they have that reunion. But in the Lynch movie, there was no, Gurney didn't think that Jessica was the traitor, so you don't really have that ramification. There was no capturing of the Sardaukar. There is no Captain Ramsham in the Lynch movie. Now, the miniseries does adapt most of this. It's fairly close. At least they got all of the elements in there. Although they have the Sardaukar in the miniseries have a little Sardaukar tattoo on the backs of their necks, so it's pretty easy to tell if they're Sardaukar, which is not the case. That is not how it's explained in the book. So in terms of the Villeneuve adaptation, we know that the reunion moment is there. We've seen that in the trailer where Gurney and Paul see each other, but we don't know how much of the rest of this. We don't know if there is a Captain Ramsham, if they capture some of these Sardaukar. That's going to play into something later on, as we'll see. But it's exciting. I love this chapter. There's a lot of good stuff. We don't know also if Gurney is going to be under the impression that Jessica is the traitor. So that scene in the miniseries is pretty good, but we haven't gotten to that part yet, so we won't really talk more about it now. But this is a fantastic chapter. It's one of the longer ones. There's a lot of set pieces. They're outside, and then they're inside, and just a lot to process. It probably could have been broken up into a couple of chapters, but I think Frank was like, it's time to start wrapping things up and heading towards the end game. So we are getting pretty close to the end. There's definitely still a few more juicy chapters. The last part of the book is appendixes and a glossary of terms, so it's not like we still have this much more. So we're getting pretty close to the end. A lot of exciting chapters to come. Let me know your thoughts on this chapter if you're reading along. If you have any questions about anything, there's a lot in here, but it's all very straightforward stuff. So pretty easy to grok what's going on here. And yeah, let me know your thoughts, and we'll see you again soon.